All right, let's get into this conversation now. There are less than 2 days to go until one of the country's most important elections. With the first day of special votes having come and gone, the IEC expressing satisfaction in how the day has gone. And this is despite sporadic incidents. Let's reflect now on the 30 years of democracy ahead of that important day of voting on Wednesday. And to help us do this is former President Thabo Mbeki, who joins us this evening. Mr. President, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. I want to kick off the conversation with the special votes that have begun today, and of course they're going to come to an end tomorrow. Do you get a sense that people appreciate this opportunity to exercise their democratic right to vote?
Yes, I think so, Chloe. I think that such is the mood in the country, in my sense. The mood in the country in terms of the challenges the country faces, that people want to exercise this right, a duty to vote, in order really to help to determine who governs the country. So that's my sense, that really I would expect that the voter turnout would improve. I really do think it would. At least I hope it does. But I think it will. From the responses I got, I saw in the people when I was campaigning in Soweto, in Pretoria, in Pietermaritzburg, in Durban, the mood seemed to me to be that the people really wanted to participate in this process.
Yes, and perhaps it's important for me to ask you the question about how are you feeling and when it is that you plan to go and cast your vote. We saw a message from you via social media that you had been unwell. How are you feeling?
No, I'm recovering while I had an attack of flu while I was campaigning in Durban. They said it was this H1N1 thing, but it impacted on what are called comorbidities, because challenges with my lungs. So you had a combination of the flu and this other thing. So I had to spend a week in hospital. But the doctors, the nurses, the medical personnel, they did a very good job. So I'm at home now. I'm at home now recovering.
That's very good to hear, Mr. President. And let's then proceed and talk about at least the over 50 political parties that are going to be contesting just on the national ballot alone. Does this indicate, in your eyes, a democracy that is maturing?
I wouldn't go that far, Chloe. You know, the political parties, in principle, represent something. I do not know what 52 different political parties in South Africa represent. That differs from one another. But of course, it's a democratic right of any one of us to form a party, run for election and all of that. But I don't think necessarily the number 52 means an expansion, entrenchment of democracy. It might be something to look at carefully, because in some instances it might not be anything to do with all of this, but other interests that drive people to set up political parties. But 52, you do not have 52 different national perspectives about the future of South Africa. But nevertheless, people do have a right to form their own parties.
Okay. I get a sense from you that what you seem to be gravitating towards is what at some point was discussed at Parliament ahead of the adoption of the new electoral laws. And in particular, a word was used there, or should I say a phrase, that there's got to be a prevention of frivolous participation. Is that what you think is going on here with so many political parties contesting the space?
I think there should be a cutoff point in terms of where we have a proportional representation system. There must be a cutoff point to say whoever is allowed to get a seat in parliament must get a minimum number of votes. Otherwise, you could have a field day in which anybody, for not good reasons, could just stand. I think the discussion in parliament was legitimate. But of course, it must not be done in a way which suppresses the diversity. We must allow enough space for this diversity to express itself.
Yes.
But I think that the parliament were legitimate in saying, let's look at this thing a bit more closely.
Let's then talk about some of your experiences on the campaign trail. And I almost feel the need to warn both myself and you, Mr. President, that we will be in trouble if we start hearing you campaign for the ANC here. We saw you on the campaign trail. Talk to us about what this experience has exposed you to about how ordinary South Africans live and feel about the state of their country.
Colin, let me reassure you, I'm not going to campaign for the ANC. I don't think the ANC would even want me to do that. Rather, what I'd like us to do, Toli, is to discuss South Africa. What is South Africa? What is this South Africa? These people, all of us who are standing for this party or that party to run, who are we? You know, last month, during the month of April, I got many requests, I think including from yourselves. Yes. To say, can you please comment, or what's your view of South Africa after 30 years of democracy? I got many requests from the domestic media, from international media, various organizations, Black Business Council, this and that, the other. So I decided, Toli, that the best thing to do would be to give one speech to answer all of these questions. Yes. Which I did. I hope you listened to what I delivered the speech at the Freedom Park on the 30th of April. Indeed. To talk about South Africa after 30 years. And essentially, here's one of the main points I was making, that you have the first more or less 15 years of South Africa developing very well in its economy, in its politics, in its constitutional arrangements, very positive. And then you have the next period going in the opposite direction. So I was posing the question that, you see, here you have a situation where the governing party is the ANC during these first 15 years. The ANC is the governing party during the second 15 years. But why does it behave in manners that are directly opposite each other? How do we explain this change? Now, I cited a number of people, Toli, to describe what happened in the first 15 years. I was trying to avoid a situation where people will say that I'm praising myself or something like that. For instance, the CEO of the South African Institute of Race Relations has made a very good presentation about this, explaining what happened. Even a famous journalist like Tony Steenbeck also did the same thing. Gave a detailed account of what happened, exactly of the manner that I've been talking about. So the point I made then, Tony, in this context, was that it's something that maybe many of us did not pay sufficient attention to, was that even in 1994, there were certain people in the old order who were not at all happy that the ANC had won those elections, who continued to adopt a position that the ANC must be defeated. You will see this, you will have seen this, actually, I'm sure, in the discussion that has been in the media on the National Democratic Revolution. I hope you've looked at that. There's been a lot of discussion about this National Democratic Revolution, with many of these people saying it is actually a disguise for the introduction of a communist system in our country. And therefore it must be defeated. that you've had during this last 15 years an intervention by these people in order to make sure that this ANC fails because they don't want it to implement this communist national democratic revolution. Now, Koli, I'm sure you have followed what the commission of inquiry that was appointed by President Ramaphosa, led by Judge Nugent, to look into the matter of the South African Revenue Service. I hope you've read that report, because that report is very, very important, and it tells a very interesting story.
Yes.
And the story is that there are some people who took a decision to destroy the South African Revenue Service. Now, the South African Revenue Service, SARS, as you know, accounts for 95% of state revenues. And yet the Commission Nugent says there were some people who took the decision to destroy SARS. Now, to destroy SARS means to destroy the democratic state, because the state would have no money to pay civil servants or build schools or pay soldiers or whatever. And they explain in detail what was done to try to destroy SARS. The question must arise, who are these people who would take such a terrible decision? What they did is explained in detail in the SARS, in the Nugent Commission report. And incidentally, the Zondo Commission also looked at this matter and agreed with Nugent, but added more information. I'm saying, Goli, there was an intervention made by people who had wanted the ANC to fail because the ANC was bringing this communist agenda labeled National Democratic Revolution. So it had to fail. And one way to ensure it fails, deny it the revenues that any state needs.
Yeah.
It's a very concrete example. It's out in the open domain. It's not an invention of Thabo Mbeki. So people must look at what Judge Nugent said, Judge Zondo said, and try to understand what is this thing. Now, second thing Tolia must mention in this context is ESCOM. I've spent quite a lot of time looking at ESCOM, because a lot of the stories that were told about ESCOM, I didn't believe. For instance, Koli, you may remember this. January 2008, there was a national load shedding. You remember that?
We remember that.
National power failure. The first time it was national. Before that, there had been regional power failures. But January 2008 was a national power failure. I was president at the time. I apologized, even the State of the Nation address 2008, I apologized for this and so on. But only to discover, maybe 2019, there is an SIU report, a Special Investigation Unit report, which was set up to investigate certain elements of what was going wrong at ESCOM.
Yes.
That report says there was no need for a power failure on January 2008. It was completely unnecessary. And they say it occurred because there was a system within ESCOM which would alert the station managers, the managers at the power stations, to say, you are running out of coal, please replenish. They ignored that warning until the power stations ran out of coal in January 2008. And that's why there was a power failure. So it was deliberate within ESCOM. It was not failure of machines or anything like that. I'm saying that's not my story. It's a report of the SIU.
Yes.
Which explains this thing and says, if you tell the simple things of replenishing coal, there would never have been a power failure. Now the question arises for me, who does that? why would station managers run out of coal deliberately? And the report will say, that SIU report says that the price of coal to Eskom doubled immediately because you removed the obligation to put this thing out on tender, and you had to go to the nearest coal merchant to say, I want so much coal. That doubled the price of coal to Eskom immediately. Now, I'm giving these examples, Toli, to say, what I've been trying to say to our people, South Africa, everybody, ANC, non-ANC, everybody, let us try and understand South Africa. Let's try and understand what happened. This thing that the CEO of the Institute of Race Relations will say, this is what happened to South Africa between this period and that period, very positive. And then he says, and this is what happened in South Africa from this period onwards, very negative.
Yes.
How do we understand it in order to understand South Africa?
Okay.
So that then you see, you are then able to say, if this is the South Africa we have, what is it that we do in order to get it right?
Okay. All right.
You get my point.
Indeed, I do. Allow me the opportunity to come in at this point, because I don't want us to move around in circles. I think you are very clear. First 15 years, South Africa worked well. The last 15 years have been problematic, and you've stated, or you've made two examples, SARS and Eskom. These are not my own words, President Mbeki. There is another famous journalist. You're quoting a journalist at some point. I'm going to quote a South African journalist that you know very well, Mondli Makhanya. He wrote an article where the content of it, and I'm going to read directly from the caption of that particular article, where he says, Thabo Mbeki just stopped short of saying it, but he actually did say it. The ascension of his successor, Jacob Zuma, to the highest office in the land was a counter-revolutionary act engineered by elements of the old apartheid order. That's Mondli Makhanya. Do you agree with the caption, or should we say the summation of what you have just presented to us?
No, I don't know. I don't want to debate Mondli on this matter. But I'd rather put this matter in my own words. What I'm trying to say, objectively, there was an intervention by forces in this country which were against democratic change. And they were determined to make sure that it fails. They intervened and did various things. I cited you these two examples of SARS and Eskom. There were others. Transnet is the same. They intervened to make sure that this democracy fails. Now, that's objectively what happened. And I'm saying next month, after the elections, Claudia might tell you this, we are going to issue a whole document on the Eskom matter, a whole document on the SARS matter, to give all of the details of what happened. That's the point I'm making. Now, in the course of its intervening, the counter-revolution to produce whatever results, I have no doubt that it worked with some people in the ANC in order to produce what it wanted to produce. I have no doubt about that. That is correct. But as to whether this person or that person is the one who did, I leave that to Mondli Makhanya. But it is correct to say, when the counter-revolution intervened to produce these negative outcomes, it certainly worked with people within the ANC.
So those people who may or may not have worked with the counter-revolutionary elements, are those people coming in the last 15 years of democracy, which therefore see a decline, as you put it?
some of them probably would have been infiltrated into the ANC long before. Even by 1994, some of them were already within the ranks of the ANC. But I think the other thing that we need to take into account is that for some years, the quality of the membership of the ANC has been declining. It happened in this way. It was raised by President Mandela when he gave his political report in Mafikeng in 1997. And he said that since we become government, there are many people who are joining the ANC, not because they support his values, his principles, or whatever, but as a step ladder to a government job. You are ANC, that will give you a possibility to get a job in government. And that will give you a possibility to loot into your own pocket. Mandela raised this thing, President Mandela raised this thing in December 1997 and said already there are quarrels taking place within the ANC about these things, about resources, not principles. I'm saying over the years, you've had a deterioration in the quality of the membership of the ANC. Not everybody, but some of these people. And that's part of what then has this negative element of people who are there, they call themselves the ANC, and they are in government, but are doing things which have got nothing to do with the values and principles of the ANC. Those would be in addition to people who had been working with the counter-revolution. That's part of the negative things that happened. And it's an important thing to bear in mind, Toli, because the ANC itself understood this problem. That is why the 2017 National Conference, the 2022 National Conference of the ANC, both of them, said the ANC must renew itself for its own survival. That's conference decisions, not Thabo Mbeki's view. The ANC must renew itself for its survival because they understood, the conferences understood that this quality in the deterioration in the quality of the membership of this was impacting negatively on the ANC and impacting negatively on the country, given that the ANC was the governing party.
Yeah.
So you have all of these various tendencies which help to produce this negative phenomenon in the last 15 years.
The question, therefore, President Mbeki, that some people are going to ask is, all of this, perhaps starting with the targeting of South Africa. Yes, I've heard your explanation that these are people who feared that this national democratic revolution was going to bring about certain changes that they did not necessarily like. However, in the 30 years that the ANC government has been in power, what has it done? Not only to rid itself of the elements that would have been working with those that want to destroy this country and not see it flourish, but what has happened even within the state capacity, the intelligence community, to pick these things up in order that they are nipped in the bud before the country is completely destroyed?
That's a very, very important question, Toli. But you see, the reality is, let me start with the membership of the ANC. As I said, President Mandela says in 1997, let us make sure we don't keep these people in the organization and don't allow them to come in, otherwise they corrupt the organization. 20 years later, that's 2017, the ANC National Conference repeats exactly what President Mandela said. And the reason for it is because it proved very difficult to keep out these people that Nelson Mandela said should be kept out. Because only to become a member of the ANC, I applied to a branch. At that time, I paid 12 rand, and I say Viva ANC 20 times. I recite the Freedom Charter. I'm a member. You are only going to discover 2 years later that this person did not join for the right reasons. I'm saying totally practically, we failed to deal with this matter raised by Nelson Mandela in 1997. Please make sure we don't bring on these people who are not ANC, but staff riders who are after crooked things. We couldn't solve the problem because it was difficult to weed out who genuinely, this new member, is this a genuine member or is this a fake member? Then these are the matters that you raise. I think it's taken us a lot of time to understand the reality I'm talking about a counter-revolution. I'm quite certain, Toli, that when I went to vote in 2009 and went to vote in 2014 and went to vote in 2019, I was not as clear then as I am now about the impact of this counter-revolution on our country in terms of the destruction of the state organs and all sorts of things. I think the awareness, the sensitivity to this reality is not as high, even today, is not as high as it should be. So people understand the reality of South Africa.
Yeah.
You mentioned things like the intelligence services. You quite correctly. I can see, because I sat in government as president, and I could see it that, why are we losing this capacity? What do we do about it? And unless you understood the source of the problem, it's very difficult to solve it.
Yeah.
Just look at the surface manifestation. It's taken us time, I think, to get to understand better the reality of South Africa. And I hope, I'm saying even today, to this day, there are many people in the country who don't understand what I'm saying, who don't read the documents as I say they must read. Read Nugent, read Zondo, read all these things. I can give you a reading list when I told you. Comments on this question about the National Democratic Revolution.
Yes.
Just to understand, these people in the country all these years, this has been their conception of this National Democratic Revolution. Therefore, this is why they've acted in this particular way. It's all explained. It's in the public media. It's in the public space.
Yeah.
But not many people understand this.
All right.
But I'm saying that I hope now we have a better understanding of this real South Africa. And so when we make our choices in 2-3 days' time, we make all our choices better informed about what South Africa is.
Okay. I think you've gone some distance to explain to us at least what you believe is the source of the problem. And perhaps you may have to spell it out, but we're going to take a break. When we return, I would like to know from you, what is it, therefore, that has convinced you, having now gained clarity about what the problem is, what has convinced you to go and campaign for the very same political party? But you're going to answer that question in a break. Well, shortly after. We'll continue in a bit. Mr. President, let's continue the conversation. You've outlined a number of issues. You have gone into great detail telling us about various reports that have been produced to try and point out what the problem is in this country that has dragged it down, at least in your view, in the last 15 years of democracy. But I don't want to assume that I am clear about the source of the problem, because you seem to have established what the source of the problem is. Are you crystal clear what the source of the problem is, having now seen all of what you've explained?
Yes, Toli, I think I've got a pretty good idea of what went wrong. And that's why I was offering that I'm ready to supply you also with all the literature you need in order to understand this, because these explanations are actually, many of them, in the public domain. So I think I've got a pretty good understanding of what the problem is. And I think even some of the people, Toli, will find that some of the people who are involved in this process of counter-revolution, you will find some of them speaking out to explain what they did. So it's not, I have no doubt whatsoever about what went wrong in our country, what went wrong. You know, it was not actions of particular individuals. It was a decisive process. As I'm saying, it's a counter-revolution. It's an organized group of people who decide from their point of view to say, look, the danger we face is imposition of communism in this country. You have people, Koli, I'll give you all of the literature that you want to read, who say, you've had an article which says that the ANC lost its mind when the Soviet Union collapsed. Because the mind of the ANC lost its brain. Lost its brain, not its mind, lost its brain. Because the brain of the ANC was in Moscow. And people believe that. So when the ANC becomes elected in South Africa and becomes the ruling party, these people say, but this is Moscow that is governing us and we must defeat it. I'm saying, no, I'm very clear when I call you about this, and I'm quite ready to help you if you want, and to supply you with all of the literature that you need so that when I as a journalist,
yes,
you need to understand this reality of South Africa as it is, not as you imagine it to be.
All right.
But as it is, so that we know how to handle it.
Now, you've said that clearly part of the problem can also be traced inside the ANC. You have now decided during this campaign season to get out there and urge South Africans to put back your political home back into power. I need to remind you of what you've said previously. At some point, you said you can't possibly campaign for the ANC because there are known people in some communities who are associated to this party, but they also are engaged in criminal activity. Are you confident now that the ANC has rid itself of these elements now that you have seen it fit to go and campaign for it?
No, as I say, Koli, as I said, the 2017-2022 National Conference of the ANC decided that it's absolutely imperative that the ANC must renew itself. That process, certain elements of it have started, but we haven't gone into the depth of it, that process of renewal. So it still has to happen. It still has to happen. So the thing I was complaining about, that you had certain instances in the country where branches of the ANC were led by criminals. That's why I was saying, you know, how do you expect me to go and say vote ANC? I go to a particular constituency. Here is this ward. I go to a particular ward, and there's an ANC branch in this ward, and it's led by a criminal. The population in the ward know that. How do I say to this population in this ward, vote ANC? It doesn't make sense. I can't do that. That's what I was saying to the ANC. I was saying, please, can we clean up this house? Clean up house so that indeed when we go to the population to say vote ANC, we're talking about them voting for an ANC that lives up to its obligations to serve the interests of the people. That's what I was saying. That work has not been done, Tony. It's not been completed. It started. It's work that has got to continue beyond the elections to make sure that the ANC becomes what the people expect of it.
Yeah. I've got to press you a little bit on this. Yes, the work has not been done, but it has started. Give us those signals that the work has indeed started of building this new cadre that was sung about 2017, as you've said, 2022 conference. Where are the signals that things are starting, or the cleanup process, let me put it simply, the cleanup process is well on its way?
Let me give you just one example, Cole, which I think is a very important example, which was the establishment of the Integrity Commission of the ANC. Very critically important to say Membership of the ANC does not consist only in your being able to pay your dues. It also consists on the issue of integrity. If you're if you are not a person of integrity, you can't belong to this organization. So you have an integrity commission set up there. It's even empowered itself. It doesn't need somebody to refer Thabo Mbeki to them. If they think that here is this Thabo Mbeki, member of the ANC, really not behaving properly, they can summon Thabo Mbeki to say, come and can answer. And make recommendation as to these people are not of sufficient integrity to belong to the organization. They may be well paid up member in good standing and so on. But I'm giving an example. It was a very important decision to say, let us have an independent mechanism in the ANC which judges this matter about integrity. That's an important example, I'm saying, of the step forward that's been taken in order to deal with this.
Yeah.
There's other work that has been done. There's a very detailed program of action that has been prepared, for instance, by the ANC Veterans League, to say, when we say renew the ANC, what we mean practically. So it's not a theoretical, a philosophical thing. And worked out a very extensive program in detail of what needs to be done. So even indeed, I'm sure after the elections, the NEC will come back to this matter.
Yeah.
And there'll be no problem with them saying there's actually a program we can start on Tuesday.
Okay.
The readiness, the will is there. We have to act.
Okay. I want to move on from this topic just in case we get carried away and people think that we are now in the process of trying to sanitize the ANC. I've got to ask you this question. There was I think it was a 17-page letter that you penned to the ANC deputy president. I want to think it was somewhere around 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And you were very aggrieved on the back of the Phala scandal, and you were clear that the ANC, including the work of Parliament, they are not there to hold the president to account, and therefore you were just completely disheartened by that kind of action. Have you since had a change of heart, particularly around the Phala scandal?
That letter, Toli, yes, it dealt in part with Phala, but it was not about Phala. It was about the parliamentary procedures. You know, as the ANC is critical to the establishment of this democracy. The drafting of the 1996 Constitution, for instance, the rules of Parliament and all of this. All of we are bound by the rules we ourselves put in place. That's the point I was raising, that this parliamentary caucus was acting in a manner which was inconsistent with the rules that had been placed by the ANC itself as to how it exercises oversight over the executive. That the many things that were done wrongly in terms of parliamentary procedures as defined in all of the documentation by the ANC itself. That's the question I was raising. I met with the leadership of the ANC. Fortunately, they asked me to meet them. I met with them, and they wanted the explanations from me as to, please, can you explain in detail what you mean, which I did. And then indeed it was agreed that we should then continue this engagement, because this has to do with how does the ANC respect its own decisions. There are definite decisions about parliamentary oversight over the executive. And you cannot say, I was saying in that letter, you cannot say that simply because you got a majority, therefore we can then decide as we wish. That's incorrect. It can't be true. So these are the matters I was raising, Koli, and I will continue to raise them. Unless there's changes in the manner in which the exercise of this oversight is done. But as of now, and given the work that was done, 1993, 1994, 95, 96, we worked very hard at all of these things to put in place these policies. You can't ignore them. now simply because you've got a majority in Parliament.
Mr. President, we can't not talk about the future of this country. And that future very much resides with young people. The country has a massive problem of youth unemployment. Should young people look to politicians to change their state of helplessness right now?
Toli, I mentioned to you that on the 30th of April, I tried to answer the question as was posed to me by many people. What do you think of South Africa over 30 years? Including the question of, well, what do we do about it? At the end of that presentation, Toli, I said, it seems to me that so deep is the crisis in the country, including with regard to we are raising about youth unemployment and so on. But there are many problems in this country, the growth of the economy, crime, drugs, gender-based violence, many things, that really, I think we need to go back to a national dialogue. Let the country come together again as it did at the Codesa. Let the country come back together again and say, what do we do about these many things, including this youth question that you raised, an important question. Now, I've said clearly with regard to that I'm putting this proposal to our national foundations, the Mandela Foundation, the Kathrada Foundation, Sobukwe, Bigwa Foundation, Lutuli, Mbeki, all of this, to say to them, look, my view is the country now desperately needs a national dialogue which is inclusive. It must be inclusive of everybody, of the youth, of the women, of the political people, of religious people, of the traditional, everybody. Let's have an inclusive national dialogue and put on the agenda of that dialogue all of these important national challenges. And let the nation speak and say, with regard to this, do this, with regard to that, do the other. So that matter is with the foundations. And I'm really hoping that they will take it on board and put the proposal to the nation. And then hopefully the nation would respond. I was very, very glad that the president of the ANC, President Ramaphosa, responded after that speech. He responded immediately and they said, as far as ANC is concerned, they would support that initiative of a national dialogue. So it's not particular political parties that must produce solutions. Let's us as a people get together, young and old and so on. Let's all of us get together and out of this collective mind, come out with these outcomes.
All right.
Because I think the country is in very serious trouble and it needs that kind of national dialogue.
Well, thank you for that. We're going to take a break, and when we return, we conclude the conversation with former President Thabo Mbeki in a moment. You're watching News at Prime, and if you're just joining us, well, you find us at the tail end of a conversation with former Head of State Thabo Mbeki, reflecting on some of the country's challenges, but also trying to look ahead to what possible solutions are there to try and resolve these. And you've heard him talk about a national dialogue that he is proposing, particularly on the question of youth unemployment, which has been said over many times now that it is a crisis waiting to happen. Mr. President, I want to move on to coalitions, and they are a very real possibility after these elections. Do we require a legal framework to guide these, in your view?
No, I don't think you do. Coalitions are a political product. And I don't think a political product needs political governance systems. The politicians must take a decision as to how they want to make these coalitions function. It's not a legal matter at all. I think you intervene with the law in a political matter, you're going to produce a mess. So I think the politicians must decide what they do about these coalitions.
But if you leave it to politicians, you have seen the kind of mess that has happened in Johannesburg. It's happened in Nelson Mandela Bay. I can mention all of the major metros, including other municipalities that may not necessarily be in the media spotlight. Is that not the danger, particularly at national government level? It would seem to me that you are dismissing this conversation, perhaps because you are of the view that the ANC might still carry the day here after these elections.
No, Tolly, don't make me campaign for the ANC when I'm not campaigning for the ANC.
That's not the intention.
The fact of the matter, really, I'm quite convinced about this one. There's no political problem which is going to be solved by the law. None. Whether coalition or anything. The coalition thing is an outcome of a political process. The population go to vote, they will vote in particular ways, and then parties emerge in whatever weight. Those parties must know how to, if their first obligation, each of these parties, doesn't matter which one, they owe a responsibility to the country. They don't owe a responsibility to themselves. You owe a responsibility to the country, and you must be able to say as a politician, what is it that must be done which will best serve the interests of the people? Then you will be able to solve the problem as to if there were a coalition of these two parties, who should lead. You won't solve the problem by the law. And you won't solve it if you say, no, my principal ambition, I must be the president, regardless of what happens to the Republic of South Africa. You can't use the law to resolve a political problem. It will always fail.
But that assumes, but that assumes, President Mbeki, that there is political maturity in the country, unless, of course, you are going to lead me down that path. Then I will point out many examples for you. I've had political parties sit in the studio who say ours is to make sure that we get into positions of influence, either within a municipality, so that we are able to maneuver and make our presence felt. Is that the sort of maturity you think resides within the South African political space?
Totally, I'm saying, if we take it, if we assume that the forthcoming elections on the 27, 28, 29 of May, which have started, if they produce what might be called a hung parliament.
Yes.
A hung parliament. It's the responsibility of the people who would have been elected to that hung parliament to say to themselves, sure, we've been elected to this National Assembly. Governance is going to be very difficult now because we've got this hung parliament. We don't even have a majority to elect a president. So what is to be done? I'm saying it becomes the absolute responsibility of all of us politicians to say, what is it that will serve the interests of the people of South Africa best? What is it that we must do? So it must be possible to say, if you're a minority party, to say, okay, I'm ready to concede that you must lead us. That will be in the interest of the country. But you must concede this and that and that. And that is possible. In other countries, Cole, you've had minority governments. Governments that are elected by minority, but the parties in parliament say it's in the interest of the future of our country to allow this minority party to govern. It's happened in many countries. We may very well be faced with this situation, but I agree with you. I agree with you. It's all going to depend on the maturity, the political maturity of the politicians we elect to parliament.
President Mbeki, I thank you sincerely for your time and indeed some of what you've shared with us here. We are completely out of time. I could have taken the conversation a little bit further, but I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you indeed for joining us.
But thanks, Tolani. Have a good evening. Well, Toli, have a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, former President Thabo Mbeki.